everybody, and welcome to Mythmakers. Mythmakers is the podcast for fantasy fans and fantasy creatives, brought to you by the Oxford Centre for Fantasy. My name is Julia Golding, and I'm an author and director of the Centre. And today I'm joined by Jacob Rennaker. Jacob, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, thanks, Julia. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Jacob Rennaker. And I work kind of in the intersection of education and storytelling. I have my kind of educational background is a bachelor's degree in ancient Near Eastern studies, master's degree in comparative religion, and a PhD in religion. So looking at different storytelling strategies of different religious texts, ancient mythology and traditions, and even contemporary texts and traditions, and creating dialogues between different stories, different authors, different ideas, including J.R.R. Tolkien.
Yeah, and actually today we're going to do a really deep dive into the films, the Peter Jackson films of Lord of the Rings, because we're now 20 years on, or more, from when they began filming, when the first film came out. And anybody who follows this on the internet will see there's been quite a lot of chatter about the difference between the films and the books. And we thought we would devote some quality time to looking at the choices that the script writers, that's Peter Jackson, Fran Walsh and Philippa Boyens, the choices they made when they were adapting, and think through what that meant for those films. And I suppose we're also thinking if future filmmakers are going to come along and have another go, which they probably will at some point, maybe as a mini-series or whatever these days, what you might do differently this time round. And Jacob, as well as those wonderful list of qualifications he gave, he also qualifies as being a fan of Tolkien. So it is also two fans talking to each other. So first of all, we're going to look, of course, at the Fellowship of the Ring. I don't know about you, Jacob, but actually of the three films, this is my favorite. Are you?
Yeah, it's tough. It's tough to say. Yeah, it's tough to say because it's really all one continuous story. In my mind, it's just one long, one 11.5+ hour narrative. I love the beginning, so I love Fellowship. Yeah, it is a lot more pastoral. You're kind of eased into the story. Whereas if you kind of start at Two Towers or Return of the King, then things are a lot darker and heavier. So it is a nice kind of stroll into the world of Middle Earth. So I do appreciate it for that.
I think I like it most because it feels as though it got the book best. It felt like it really did live up to what I was hoping for. But anyway, that's just a personal choice. That's the one that, if anyone was saying which is my desert island one, that's the one I'd take. I'd also better point out that Jacob and I are both people who watch the extended edition. So if we refer to scenes you haven't yet watched, people, that may be because you're watching the theatrical cuts. But anyway, but let's go on. So first of all, let's look at before they even actually started filming anything. What do you think about some of the changes that were made in Fellowship of the Ring, particularly in terms of casting? What strikes me most is the decision to make Frodo really young, whereas in the novel he's in his 50s.
Right. Yeah. It's interesting choice. So I'm maybe kind of backing up a little bit. My first exposure to Lord of the Rings was the Peter Jackson film.
That's interesting. So you'll be a different way around to me. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Exactly. So and then from different people that I've spoken with, right? So I'm in some senses, not a purist, not pure enough. I'm not a pureblood.
No. That's Harry Potter purebloods.
Right. So I'm not intellectually pureblood, I guess, when it comes to Tolkien's world, as some would consider. But it was my entry point. So that was essentially. I only think of Frodo. That was my initial exposure to Frodo, was Elijah Wood as I don't know, he's kind of in the film seems to be a early 20s or so, kind of Frodo. So it makes sense to me. And at the time when I saw it, when it came out, I was in my very early 20s. So I connected with him. So it was easy for me to see myself in Frodo because of the similarity in age. And I'm sure that was absolutely a marketing and storytelling strategy from the Hollywood end of things for which audiences you're trying to attract. How do you make it as successful as possible to as broad of an audience as possible? So having a main character whose age is right in there, you're going to pull in younger audiences as well as the older audiences where most of the cast is, are more adult, right? That they're, 40, 30, 40, 50-year old. That's easy. But how do you get a younger audience age down some of your characters? So yeah, I think it was a natural and I think inevitable choice. And I'm I'm fine with it because it got me into Lord of the Rings. I do appreciate the difference. So Julia, what do you see as maybe some of the differences in his character by shifting his age in the film to the book?
Yeah, it does shift everything, because if you rerun it and say put Martin Freeman in as Frodo instead, because Martin Freeman was more age appropriate for The Hobbit, it's still a really good casting. But in the books, Frodo has a certain authority and maturity that he doesn't in the films. The films are a coming of age story. I can make arguments for why it's appropriate. So I always think of Frodo in particular as very much a First World War recruit, someone too young who's asked to sacrifice his life for everybody else. So that element definitely works. And there's also the argument that hobbits at 50 are not as old as us lot at 50 because of they've got longer lifespans. I don't think it's a mistake. I can see exactly why it was done, but it is an area where another go at the film, it would give the next generation of filmmakers a different place to go if they wanted. And that would be really interesting. It makes the hobbits less idiotic, not idiot, that's a bit too strong, less
rambunctious.
It makes them a bit more sort of sorted if it's a slightly older group who are going, I think.
Yeah, so if you see, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, there is a little bit of, they do seem completely clueless in a way which I think is beyond the clueless. They are little people in a big world, but they play up the humour and the fact that they don't quite make the right calls at some time, which isn't quite the same as the book.
Yeah, I was just thinking when you were saying, casting somebody who's more age appropriate and how that would provide a different angle for filmmakers and storytellers in the film visually and in terms of kind of tropes. You could have, Frodo's journey as midlife crisis, right? Essentially. And that's a very different take on why you're going out on this journey and what you're having to prove to yourself, right? What you're trying to understand about life. It's kind of a looking back, kind of a retrospective. Where have I been? What have I done with my life? And what do I actually want to be now that I'm partway along and I'm now on the downhill slope? What do I really want to be doing? And so seeing the journey of the ring as kind of, him taking his life into his own hands instead of sitting complacent in the Shire and then kind of being thrust in one sense, but then also choosing to enter into like the last half of his life into this life-changing and world-changing adventure. So yeah, that's a completely different angle from the coming of age, where it's just kind of this continual, kind of upward trajectory to then becoming a completely fully well-rounded, realized adult. So now, if you start there at the adult starting point, rather than the, somebody fighting the inevitable decline into, mediocrity, complacency. So that's a completely, so I think that's fascinating. And I would love to see somebody have that take.
Yeah, the danger would be it would feel a bit too similar to, because that's really, The Hobbit is like that, isn't it?
Yeah, right.
But I think looking at it from the positive side, what that casting choice did do is Frodo is beautiful. He's got a beautiful he's like angelic almost, isn't he? With his big blue eyes. There's a beauty to him, which I don't think, there's quite a few jokes in the actual book about the fact that he's put on a bit of weight and, he needs to get in shape. so there is a difference. There's just a different feeling from Frodo the film version from Frodo the book version. But it does mean that there is a different. I mean, it's always good if there's new pleasures when you go to the book or go to the film. I mean, I think this gives us two bites of the cherry. We can have one version of the story, which is the film, and another, which is the book version.
Right.
Okay, so going into the actual the way the script is written before we talk about the sort of structure of it, but the register and the diction, do you think they captured in how they approach the script the right sort of Tolkien-esque language? You're a language expert.
Yeah, it's a good question again because my first exposure to the world of Tolkien and Middle Earth is the films. So as I'm reading it, it's hard for me to divorce the voice inside my head from the different actors who were portraying those voices. But yeah, it is really interesting, right? With the different. So I think one of the things that works well is having different diction for different areas of the Shire, right? So
Oh, yeah.
Pippin's diction, right? So you have these different, instead of just saying we're just going to have randomly chosen different kind of a hodgepodge of different British dictions used by the different characters, that can actually be in your favor if you kind of consider different areas of the Shire as being different kind of linguistic areas where they're staying in the same place, they're not moving around, and so of course they're going to develop a certain cadence and different styles of speaking. So in that sense, I think it does. I didn't, when I was first watching the films, I didn't see that, but now in retrospect, I know that could have been a accident of casting that actually could, upon reflection, prove to be fortuitous in saying that the Shire isn't a monolithic culture, right? That these are people who have geographically interconnected but distinct areas. So maybe I might be giving them too much credit for what they're doing, but I'm happy to do so.
Well, if you watch the making of, which is one of the pleasures of the extended edition, is I think Billy Boyd says it was almost like it is an accident of casting in that sense, in that he's Scottish, and so the Tooks get to be Scottish. Even the name Took feels as though it should be. It could be, sounds Scottish.
Right.
There is a slight problem about it's not very big, the Shire. So to
Right.
have wildly different accents within a short space, I suppose might be a bit funny, really.
Right.
It works. There's a couple of in the Hobbits. Obviously, you've got Dominic Monaghan, who's a Brit, so his accent's fine. There were a couple of times when just a few tiny moments as a British person when Elijah Wood drops it. It's right at the beginning when he says to Gandalf, "You've only just arrived." The accent isn't quite there, and that was a shame because it jars.
Yeah.
And then the Sam accent is kind of Somersetshire, which is it's fine. It is fine. Yeah, it's fine. But the funniest of all the accents is, of course, Boromir, because Sean Bean just does Sean Bean. And Sean Bean is speaking his natural northern accent, but nobody else seems to do so in Gondor. But the most delightful thing has happened since Andy Serkis read the Lord of the Rings, the entirety of it, is that he has given everybody in Gondor a Sean Bean accent. It's just brilliant. They should have. Everybody in Gondor should have gone that way. So, I think on the whole, seeing it's a cast from many different English-speaking places, and also some of the actors are not first language English speakers, I think they did pretty well. And the actual rhythm of what they wrote and how it was, some of the lines are really beautiful, and it's very well, I think they've got a good ear, the script writers. Okay, so in the Fellowship of the Ring, what are your perfect moments?
So in terms of like visual imagery, right? So in film, right, the visuals are what are primary, and the soundscape, right, behind it. So, Howard Shore's score is inseparable from the visuals, right? They're all kind of working together in concert to provide this kind of overwhelming, soaring, perceptive experience. So, for one of those, I think for me is Aragorn's introduction, right? The first time
Yes,
you see him,
yes,
right?
yes, that's
Just
mine.
that
You
image
can't
of
have that
him and
one. It's
just
mine.
his pipe, and just like the illumination from the little bowl of the
Yeah.
pipe to then illuminating his face in this shadow and of the hood and in the dark corner, and just the sound of the fire, right, kind of like crackling to life, and the light slowly illuminating his face is just yeah, striking, haunting almost, right? And especially for somebody who wasn't familiar with the story going in, it provided, there was ambiguity there, right? So I
Mm.
didn't know going in exactly what the character was going to do or what the character was going to be. So for that was it was kind of awe-inspiring with perhaps some ominous quality to it, and I couldn't, you didn't know exactly what to take, because of course you're looking at this, the camera's looking at it kind of from the Hobbit's perspective, right? They don't know who this character is, right? So you're kind of seeing it as they see this shadowy figure in the corner who's just kind of creepily staring at them. So I thought they captured that well, but on rewatching and knowing this character, I still think it's incredible character introduction for somebody who's coming from the darkness and then, in a sense, is going to be illuminated, right? Who's going to step into the full light in this like dazzling brilliance. So yeah, it's great. How about, yeah?
Yeah, that's my moment of all the films, and it's actually based on a line in the book about the embers catching his eyes when he lights his pipe. So Tolkien provided the camera angle on that one. So as you pick that one, I think for me the Balrog sequence is one of those where the acting, the visuals, the tension, the drama, the music, everything is like a perfect set where both the book and the film are meshed. And it just feels really, really good.
Yeah, it's striking. Yeah, it's striking.
Do you have any? Before we talk about the bigger structure things, are there any moments for you which are fails?
No, I have a few more perfect moments.
Okay,
If you'll allow me.
Yeah,
this really quick. Yeah. So again, with Aragorn, I think they do so much, and I can't, like, Viggo Mortensen is just impeccable. I can't imagine anyone else there.
It was going to be Stuart Townsend, wasn't it? And then
yeah, exactly. Which
last minute change.
Right, which could have been divine intervention. I don't know. But you just how one of the things that I think, then we could talk about, because maybe some of the changes in characters a little bit further down, in our conversation. But, when Aragorn is, singing part of the Lay of Luthien, right, about Beren and Luthien, just kind of like humming, singing that softly as he's taking, the hobbits, right, and they're stopping. And Frodo asks him, what are you singing? And he's explaining the story, and then Frodo asks him, what happens to this, this elf maiden who gives herself, to this human man, and he just says, she died, and just like that moment, kind of capturing the melancholy of Aragorn as a character and kind of caught between different worlds himself. I think that sets the tone really well and builds his character in a very not just visual but like auditory way, and you just kind of get a sense, a feel for it. So anyway, that's an
extra scene, just to put that in brackets. I think wasn't in the theatrical cut, I don't think.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I think you're right.
I mean, it's a long time since I saw the original version.
Yeah. It's been so long for me too.
Okay, so is there anything where you think it doesn't quite work?
We'll
get hate mail probably for this, but
I know.
Let's be critics.
Yeah.
Think about it from the script point of view, as opposed to that's sort of primarily.
Yeah. So, something that's difficult is the wizard's duel, between Gandalf and Saruman. So one of the things, so the things that it does well and doesn't do, right? So that's not something that you're really seeing depicted in the books, is the like the full on, a wizard's duels is different, right? From, you could have gone, well, it's coming out at the same time that Harry Potter films, right? So they're in generally the same time. So different approaches to magic, right? Depicting magic. I think they're two interesting kind of foils, right? So, Harry Potter, the world of Harry Potter, magic is a tool that people use, right, to accomplish certain ends. And so a wizard's duel is going to be this kind of gunfight battle with magic being used as a weapon, and a kind of the precise weapon, or maybe even just throwing everything, throw it all against the wall and see what sticks, in a hope that you'll find one of the spells that you've memorized by that point can do some sort of damage. But with Tolkien, his magic here is kind of baked into the world, in the sense that to me, it seems that magic is more of a tone than it is a tool for Tolkien. So it kind of pervades the world itself. And so I don't know, there isn't kind of a clear description of how magic works in Tolkien's world. It's just kind of the supernatural force, almost kind of like more Star Wars esque, in this something that's kind of pervasive, and there's some way to tap into it, but that's not, Tolkien isn't concerned about explaining the magic. He's just taking that as a given, that the magic exists, magic is, and that's, embodied in the elves and just like their demeanor. So like the elves are magic, kind of this walking embodiment of Tolkien's view of magic. And so this wizard's duel, kind of come back to that scene, is it's not a shoot 'em up uh, gunfight, like you do have in Harry Potter with wands as essentially, projectile weapons, but there's something that there's a force that they're dealing with. They're kind of almost fighting with ideas and ideals, which I find really fascinating. But how do you depict that visually, especially with two actors who are not, you know, I don't think either of them would have described themselves as action heroes or action actors. So you're left kind of, and so I think they, instead of showing, projectile CGI rays, beams of light shooting at each other, you have kind of, they're using force that you're kind of left to the imagination to, like, what exactly is happening there. So and so I think conceptually that works. I like that approach, but visually it is difficult when you have older actors, and they're trying to depict some sort of fierce kind of physical competition. It's hard to capture that. So there's some moments that are difficult to take seriously, especially in light of contemporary filmmaking, and action sequences. So that's when it's a mixed bag for me, that sometimes it's easy to take me out of the film experience a
I
little.
can see why it was done, because
Yeah.
it's trying to, well, it's action, speed things up, but it's also a sense of, I think in the book it's very much, the doors are closed and you've got to stay here tough. There isn't he's constrained, but not in the way that it happens in sort of a physical battle. It's more the spider, the web closes. That's more the feel. Yeah, I hadn't thought about that really. You're right. It is quite odd to have magic used in more of a replacement for a punch up. There are a couple of times in the book where, of course, Gandalf does use magic in a more showy way, like lighting a flame. But he always says it costs, and he doesn't want to do it. He's very reluctant. So there is a bit of a step outside. Yeah. Oh, it's interesting. I'll have to think about that. I'm not sure. I it hadn't bothered me before, but now I'm going to think about it. For me, one of the scenes that doesn't work, it's in the extended edition, and it did get cut from the main thing, is as they approach Moria, Gandalf takes Frodo aside and basically says, look out, Boromir's going to try and take the ring. And it's one of the scenes where there's a bit too much exposition. And I think that's probably why it was cut from the theatrical edition. We know, we get it. And so it's also just feels a bit odd, a bit jarring, that scene. So I think that was one of the ones that perhaps didn't need to go back in the extended edition. And there's another scene which jars for me, which is the one when they're on Weathertop and Aragorn says, I'm going to go off and look for Black Riders, basically. And Frodo drops off to sleep and the other three hobbits start cooking. And Frodo wakes up and says, what are you doing?
Yeah.
That is not in the book. They're a bit more, they know that they're being pursued. They know that they're in danger. In fact, I think Frodo and Merry is, or is it Pippin? Anyway, Frodo, they're with Aragorn searching and then see the Black Riders moving about and fear they've been spotted. They're much more sensible, much more aware that it's a life and death situation. And that's one of the changes to make the hobbits a bit more, I was saying they sometimes come across as being a little bit idiotic. That is one of those moments. And you can see that maybe that's in order to show the distance they go, because they're the guys frying up sausages in the face of danger, and then they become the heroes and the heroes of the battle. It's a journey thing. But me, I just think, really? I think, I'm not sure. I have problems with that scene. Okay, so on the whole, not that many problems with many scenes, though.
Not too bad. There's some visually, I mean, with CGI, they're working as difficult with casting different actors who size-wise are in relation to each other different. So I think they did a great job with what they had to do, right? So, John Rhys Davies as a dwarf who he's not. my exposure and, first love for him was in the Indiana Jones film.
He's a very tall gentleman.
I saw him,
yeah.
He is, right? And so
tallest of them, I think.
right, having to depict these people who are normally tall and the hobbits, right, when they're in scenes with humans and wizards and elves and sometimes just because of the constraints of computer generated imagery, imposing different people into different scenes, sometimes it does seem a little off. You can tell that they're not actually there together.
Yeah, after the Council of Elrond, there's one moment where it's that bit. I think probably the CGI was just a touch behind there. There's a feel of it's like two people, sort of two layers of people. Anyway, I mean, tiny minor point.
But that's
we're being finicky, aren't we here?
But if that's the worst point, then
yeah. Oh yeah, I mean, these are our favorite films. We should have, we should have said that. Okay, so let's talk about the sort of the larger script decisions now. And there's the issue of pacing and cuts. So let's start with where it starts. For those of you, I'm sure you all know, if you've read the books, it starts with a long prologue concerning hobbits by Tolkien, which you don't actually have to read. You can skip to the first chapter. And then it goes into quite a slow build up to the party. And in the film, you, of course, get the montage of the history of the ring with Galadriel, Cate Blanchett, with the voiceover explaining quite a long setup, actually, in terms of film time. So what do you think of that particular script decision to not start in the Shire, in fact, but you start the prologue with the history of the ring? Good choice, bad choice?
I think from a filmmaking perspective, and keeping in mind the audience, that I think it was a good decision to appeal to as large of an audience as possible, right? So you're setting the table, you're kind of building the frame that the story is going to sit inside. Of course, so there's different audiences are interested in different parts of the story. And so like in the books, one of the with the rearrangement of scenes and things, right? So pulling that section from the Council of Elrond. So that's when the hobbits first learn of this. So uh in the books we're more in the from the perspective of the hobbits as they're so we're learning things as the hobbits are learning them as they go along, right? So we're just as much in the dark as they are, and these things are revelations, so we know why they're making the decisions that they're making. They make sense. Whereas if you put it against that larger backdrop from the outset, then you're not going on the same journey that they are. You're kind of in the third person kind of omniscient narrator setting. You have the information before the characters have it. So you're not going to empathize as deeply with the characters, um, because you're judging them based on the bigger picture and why they're doing something, why they're not doing something. And you can judge them in a different way than you could if you were actually learning the information at the same time. So I understand from a filmmaking perspective, it makes complete sense. I think it's a good decision to get the audience up to speed, because it's a different type of film than like a discovery film. So, for instance, just a recent one that is kind of like discovering as you go. Christopher Nolan films, Tenet. I don't know if you saw
No, I didn't.
uh, Tenet. Okay, so a lot of his are kind of like puzzle box stories, right? So you're never given an explanation from the outset. Part of the joy of those movies is kind of working through the labyrinth that he's creating and discovering what is actually happening, and then it kind of becomes self-referential, and you're having to then go back and rewatch the films, having this revelation of information and seeing it again. So that's one type of cinematic audience experience, is learning about these ideas as you go, learning facts, learning about characters, other people as the main character is, or setting everything up, or a lot of it, giving a big, large amount of background at the beginning. So I think with the type of film that the sort of audience that they needed to appeal to, putting that sort of prologue, a historical prologue, works well there.
No,
I've seen it work
yeah, I agree. I
not
think,
so well.
yeah, I think it became a very popular tool that's been copied in other films since. So it may be that in a way we've almost become too used to it. But actually, I think what it did do is it kept the audience. So it promises this is actually big battles. This is actually big baddies. This is great beauty. Whereas some people I know have been defeated by the book because it does take a while. It feels quite childish because it was started life as a bit more in the theme of The Hobbit. It took Tolkien a while to make his mind up that he was actually making an adult book. And so there is elements of the more childlike world, which if you don't hang in there, you could mistake for being the tone of the film. So I think it was a very good choice. And we're not expecting the book and the film to be the same product. It's one of the ones where, yeah, good decision, I think. Okay, what about the cuts that were made in order to? I think they were made really for pacing and just so that you don't, you've got to get in and out of a theatre within a reasonable length of time. So the major cuts are, of course, Tom Bombadil and the Barrow Downs, which is like a connected set of incidents. It happens in the Old Forest between leaving the Shire and arriving at Bree and the Prancing Pony. There's also, what else is cut? There's there's quite a lot in the Shire that's cut. Things like the visit to Farmer Maggot is cut. There's quite a lot of the journey is only just touched on. I think they did quite well with the journey, actually. But there's a whole series of events before they get to Moria, which they don't do in full. They just sort of they touch on the Crebbine and they climb up the mountain, but that sequence is more extended. But I think probably in terms of people listening to this, the big ones are missing out on missing out on Tom Bombadil. What's your view on that?
Yeah, so again, having seen the films first, I had no idea that Tom Bombadil was a thing. So when I first read the book, I was very surprised on who is this character who just keeps who's rhyming and kind of bouncing along. And the yeah, so I mean I think I think it works fine for creating a story for a film. That if there were things that you needed to cut, I suppose that's something that you could do without if the main thrust of the story is following Frodo and his journey and the kind of the fellowship itself. Then Tom Bombadil doesn't really play a huge role in their individual transformation. So if you're more concerned about their character transformation and character arcs, sure, it absolutely plays a part in that development. But cinematically, yeah, the you're I think it was a wise choice to kind of condense things there. So
Yeah,
what do you think?
I was less sad to see Tom Bombadil go than the Barrow Down bit. Yeah,
Yeah,
and you can't. The thing is, you can't do one without the other. But the
I
thing
know.
that's particularly good about the Barrow Downs is it's where they get their swords from. They don't, Aragorn
Right.
isn't just by chance carrying a load of swords around.
Right. Right.
Um, and also it links to the past, so there's an element of the world building. This is an in the day where somebody does a mini series Lord of the Rings, in the future, this is I'd really be interested to see what someone does with this on a larger canvas where they don't have to worry about packing it all into 3 hours or 2 hours, because I think it, particularly the Barrow Downs, could be really spooky, the mist and the confusion. That would be great. I'd love to see that.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I think, yeah, so Peter, and what I would love to see Peter Jackson's take on that because he started, his career in film was beginning with kind of horror film. So I bet he would be, uniquely qualified to to kind of catch that because some of the scenes that he does, the scary scenes are very scary. Uh, they're they are terror scenes, right? It's horror.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I would love to see that too.
But I think I agree with you that you know, it's the thing that has to go. And he is discussed briefly at the Council of Elrond, and they basically say if you give him the ring, he'll forget about it. He's not a safe pair of hands. It has no power over him, but he has no power over the ring. So he is completely separate from its fate, and it is about the ring. This story. So yeah, I think that's a good choice. Um, Another thing that's missing is the songs and the poems. So they do get some of them in, but not as many as Tolkien has. Are you happy with that?
Um, yeah, I mean the poems are delightful and moving in the books. And so, because like you said, these are different experiences. The film experience is different. So in terms of, some of the extended poetry that you have there that is really melancholy, that captures the, kind of pervasive sadness that exists in this world of Middle Earth, that's going to be hard to keep, the attention if you're wanting to attract a broad audience. Your younger audience is not going to want to sit through, uh, you know, recitation of, Elvish poetry. That's they're
Yeah, and
certainly
there's
not
also
going to
quite
come
a lot of
back.
comic verse that gets wheeled out as
Right,
well.
right. So younger audiences, yeah, the cow jumping over the moon, the extended
They put
poem
that in
there
The
that is just
Hobbit, didn't they?
delight.
Do you
It's
remember they?
so great. I love that. Just what Tolkien does with with the traditional kind of English rhyme and just kind of spinning it out and doing some really fun things with it. Yeah, so that'd be a different film. I mean, if you're looking at, again, if you're recasting Frodo as in his 50s, then I think you could include, if your target audience is kind of shifted, the demographic is shifted to a firm adult audience, then including some of those poems, I think would be a delight to include, and I think compelling for an older audience. Yeah.
Yeah, because the reason he puts on the ring in the book in the Prancing Pony is because he's very awkwardly singing a song then he gets a bit carried away, and so it's actually funny but terrible. It's one of those. It's a particular tone that Tolkien has, which it would be lovely to see that. Because obviously these choices are made because they've got to make cuts somewhere, but the way that the reason he puts on the ring is sort of Pippin's fault. In the novel, it's Pippin starts to say something. Frodo decides he's got to add a distraction, gets up on the table and starts singing, which is like the worst thing he could do. I think it's just hilarious. Anyway, so there is, just pointing out some areas which a future scriptwriter can have a go at. So coming towards, so much we could discuss, but coming towards the end of what we're going to talk about on Fellowship of the Ring, I think one of the biggest things, there are two things really I wanted to talk about. One is the swapping of characters. And the other is how places are imagined and personified. So on the swapping of the characters, there's a big change, which is in the book, after Frodo is injured, the elf who comes to help is in fact a man called, not a man, an elf called Glorfindel, who's a very sort of from the old lineage, who's a friend of Aragorn. And in the film, memorably, you get Arwen coming. So, Jacob, have at that. What do you think of that change?
I think it's, and again, from the, so that wasn't something initially seeing it first that I had noticed until I read the book and I saw that there's a different person. So from the story that the filmmakers wanted to tell or what they wanted to emphasize, it makes complete sense to me, because you wanted to have Arwen as a larger part in the story of the film than she was in the book. And so Glorfindel doesn't show up later in the books, right? So it's kind of or further later in Two Towers and Return of the King. So if you have a character, so one of the tip for screenwriting is, if you can combine two characters, because you're able to have that one character do more and carry more narrative weight, rather than splitting it up and having just kind of proliferating characters. Because in filmmaking, it's an art of kind of simplification, right? Minimalism, maybe not simplification, but minimalism, right? You're trying to get the greatest impact out of the fewest amount of lines, out of character choices, out of scenes. You're trying to get as much as possible into each scene. So it makes sense from a filmmaking perspective to combine those characters and let Arwen kind of save the day there, because that's our introduction to her, is as this, active character. So I think you're able to maybe have patience later with her, as she's kind of mostly, in the rest of the other two films, is mostly just kind of sitting around and pining and is sad for most of the rest of the film.
Yeah,
so this at least gives her a better rounded character. We know that she can ride a horse really fast and she can be heroic. She's just choosing to sit around and read elf poetry and pine over Aragorn and kind of wrestle with that. So I like that for what it does for her as a character and streamlining the story. What do you think?
I think it's an improvement. So I think one of the problems about Lord of the Rings is the passiveness of, well, with the honourable exception of Erwin, who we'll get to anon, there's not much roles. And you are, as a modern filmmaker, going to be saying, where can we lever? Open up the chinks. And this is a really good one.
Yeah.
They did actually think of making her active all the way through, but they rode back from that. I think they even filmed her being at Helm's Deep.
Helm's Deep, yeah, and armor. I think there are photos of her in armor, and then I think in part due to fan kind of pushback on that, I think they reeled back a bit.
So it would definitely be, for those of you who are about to write the next version of this, I think it's definitely the kind of thing to do more of, without breaking the spirit of the book. I noticed that in the new Amazon series, they've obviously made Galadriel, the young Galadriel, into very much a warrior. Even the teaser trailer, she's very badass.
Right.
But I think that 20 years on, they wouldn't have been forced to row back from putting her in a more active role. So So the final thing I wanted to ask you about, Jacob, is the places, because I think that in many ways those films are defined by what each place feels like. So you go from the Shire, which is green and rural, like countryside around where I live, to the muddy road, then to the kind of alpine feel of, it's a sort of Italianate stroke alpine feel of Rivendell. Then you've got the mountains, you've got Moria with the dark mines, then you've got Lothlorien with its silvery sort of tones and blues, then you've got the Great River, and my favourite of all, the Argonath, the statues of the Argonath.
Yeah.
What did you feel about that version of how they realised the book?
Well, I was amazed that it was all shot in the same physical place, right? So New Zealand has all of those different climes, right? Those different types of settings. So I'm eager to make a pilgrimage there at some point. So it's I thought again visually they did an incredible job differentiating the different areas, again, with not just the terrain but also the kind of color palette for each of those, right? So Lothlorien looks different visually than Rivendell does, for
That's
instance,
the one
right?
I don't like. I don't like Lorien. I think it's too dark. It's too Twilight.
Yeah.
In the book, it's described as silver and gold.
Right. I would have loved to see that.
The Eleanor flowers. I think they needed to turn the lights on.
Exactly. Yeah. And I can see why they did that, right? So they're compressing time, right?
Yeah.
So if you think as an audience member, essentially you think that maybe this took a few days, maybe a week, but it was a pretty fast week. Whereas in the book these things are spanning over. Right, when they stay in Forest Lorien and Lothlorien, they're the moon is different from when they go into the forest than when they come out of it. So some immeasurable amount of time has passed in there. So I think as a film, they're trying to say that they're only basically they're sleeping over at having a sleepover in Lothlorien, and then they're moving on. So it is dark. I would have loved to have seen, because in the books, that's one of the things that Tolkien does best. Is in his nature writing, right? His description of the natural world is, in my most recent reread, which I just finished a month ago or so, that was one of the things that stood out to me this time, was just his prose specifically about nature. And so how he describes that forest, and you're right, like the silver and golds and the, just the leaves, and I can't even paraphrase it because it's sacrilege to do so. But like how beautiful the phrases that he uses, how clearly perceptive Tolkien as a person was to the surrounding world and nature in general. So he, in a sense, is able to kind of re-enchant the ordinary world through his description of these, elvish forests that definitely had an impact on me and my perception as I was listening to his words as I'm out in nature, on a walk with my little almost 2-year-old child. I'm looking at the world differently, right? And I'm seeing it as magic. And so, I think you definitely lost that in the film, setting it at night. You can't see the beauty. There's kind of an evening, kind of twilight beauty of sorts,
it's symbolic, isn't it? I mean, I can see why they chose to do that, but it was just the place where sometimes they picked a landscape where it was better than my imagination, but my imagination of Lorien is better than what they did. It felt too much like being in a studio. There wasn't enough fresh air.
Yeah.
So it's again, we're thinking about possibilities for future adaptations. That's one place where I think you could really have a go at doing a different take and surprise us all and enchant us all.
Yeah. And differentiate that from Rivendell, because they're different, right? They're different kind of elvish cultures in a sense. So I thought the Rivendell, the set design
that was good,
phenomenal. That's really good. But doing that same sort of treatment in our other forest and our other kind of elvish miniature kingdom, but kind of develop that and give it the same sort of care that you did to Rivendell. I would like to see that.
There's probably people shouting at us, when they're listening.
Probably.
To that's my favorite scene. Anyway, it's just personal taste. These are.
It's beautiful. It's beautiful. If I want a nighttime forest, great, love it. Yeah. I would go there. I would stay the night there. I would stay more nights there than one.
On the cushions under the tree.
Right. Yeah.
Not up the tree. That looks I'm a bit worried about rolling off the edge. So, Jacob, we've done quite a deep dive into Fellowship of the Ring, and I always finish the podcast by asking my guest where in all the world is the best place for something. And as we've talked about John Rhys Davies and the dwarves, where do you think in all the fantasy worlds is the best place to be a dwarf? We're talking here obviously of the folkloric dwarf characters like Gimli and his brethren elsewhere.
Yeah, I would have to say Narnia, in part because there's such a variety of characters and creatures there that are active that I feel like dwarves don't seem as much as outsiders as they do, say, in Lord of the Rings, right? So when you're in a world that only has where kind of men and elves that are kind of in the same stature are kind of given the focus, that hobbits and dwarves are kind of seen as lesser, right? They're kind of played up for comedic relief. Whereas in Narnia, if you have talking animals, right? A person who's a different shape and size than a Homo erectus that doesn't seem out of place. It just seems like another character alongside this beautiful variety of creatures and characters with different personalities and rich cultures. So I think if I was a dwarf, I think I would enjoy the world more and probably feel more at home and be happier in Narnia than even, say, Middle Earth, possibly.
Yeah, I actually totally agree. I've been struggling to think of somewhere better.
I know.
I think of lots of places I wouldn't like to be one. There's actually many more of those. I don't want to work down a mine singing "Hi ho, hi ho." That's really off. That's really off the agenda. And as you say, very often wolves aren't given the respect. It's just a size difference. Get over it.
Right.
And I think Narnia does get over it. So I agree with you on that. Thank you so much, Jacob. We'll be back to talk about the Two Towers next. But thank you very much for listening.
Thanks for listening to Mythmakers podcast, brought to you by the Oxford Centre for Fantasy. Visit oxfordcenterforfantasy.org to join in the fun. Find out about our online courses, in-person stays in Oxford, plus visit our shop for great gifts. Tell a friend and subscribe wherever you find your favourite podcasts worldwide.